continuing with I Am That by Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj, our beloved cigarette maker in Bombay, which, between that and Ramakrishna, certainly all of my tongue in cheek playfulness about how God would manifest has been fulfilled. You know, just if you're going to come into the world as a sage, you might as well be making cigarettes in Bombay, right? And Ramakrishna, all the periods, and when you read the Great Master, wow, you have to really stretch your mind to understand or to try and open your own mind to accepting all of the different ways he tried to find God, all of the different sadhanas that he did. And when he when he was pretending to worship Rama as Hanuman, and he lived in the tree for a few months out in the temple garden. And there's a scene where he's peeing out of the tree. And when I read that for the first time, I knew I had found my beloved. there was no doubt I had found my beloved, because I just can't imagine. If I was God, that's exactly what I would do: climb a tree and pretend to be a monkey and pee out of it. It's like the absolute purest expression of divine freedom that could come to my own thwarted mind, anyway. All right, so our questioner has been getting pretty pushy here in asking these questions, and the questioner, one of the last question that we looked at. Oh, here comes Papaya. The last question was, isn't God a person? And Maharaj gives a very beautiful answer and a great comfort to anybody on the path of devotion.
No.
Oh, let me turn the mutes on here. All right, so everybody's muted, but that's not a punishment. So feel free to unmute yourself for any reason. So isn't God a person? And Maharaj says, as long as you think yourself to be a person, he too is a person. When you are all, you will see him as all. So, there's that thing that Ramakrishna says that, it's the devotion of the devotee that freezes God into form. And that form will always be your highest ideal of love, whatever that is to you. And here he's kind of backing that up from a purely Advaitic, organic perspective, that it has very much to do with how you view yourself and your relationship with the world, with not just the world, just everything that you don't think is you. And that God, that the existence of God is there, even in jnana. God is present. And as we know that through the practices of jnana, it's not God that disappears, it's our boundaried self, our imagined separation from that. And so I find it very interesting. He says, as long as you think of yourself to be a person, you're going to think that God is a person. And God is going to take on qualities of you because you're going to project them on God as that person. And this is one of the important why, or a reason why, a speculative reason why, shall we say, that we have to silence mind, because the mind defines everything for us. It tells us what everything is, and then it tells us what our place is and what we are. And it's a random narrative based on a mishmash of information that can't be verified, and most of the time is errant in its accuracy, especially our memories. And, I was having a great meditation this morning and just seeing my mind do its thing, but being able to understand why it was doing so many things, that I think that I'm my memories. I think the thing that makes me unique and the thing that defines me as an entity is my memories. And that was really clear this morning because I realized that everything my mind was thinking was just smearing memories on the present and causing my mind to think in different avenues. And so I sat there just being disinterested and just watching it, but seeing how clearly uh, that is our problem. That's the reason we can't see, we can't understand. It's that literally we're smearing our memories on the glass that we're looking through at the present moment. And that's causing us to have all kinds of ideas about the present moment. But it doesn't allow us to sit in peace or to sit in silence and to be aware of what we are when we're not assuming what we are. And so this whole notion of God as a person is you smearing your idea of self on the lens through which you're looking at the divine. And so God takes on that personhood, that individual like characteristic. Whether or not you give him a body, you're still going to smear on all of these attributes based on your experience of being human. So your idea of love is going to replace the idea of divine love. Your idea of your relationship with the divine is going to be replaced by usually the relationship you have with your parents or your grandparents. It's usually their voice that becomes the voice of God in most people. And that causes lots of turmoil, that causes lots of trouble. And so this is why the practices. So as long as you think of yourself to be a person, God is a person, right? It doesn't say that God is like a person or that God, sort of manifests. It says, if you think you're a person, God is a person to you. When you are all, you will see him as all. Now, this doesn't mean that just because, that we all have a philosophical idea of God, but at the fundamental level, at the level of which our instincts are coming from, within, we're going to treat God as a person if we think of ourselves as a person, because we really don't know how else to relate to that. And so this is one of the reasons that the path of devotion, that God manifests herself or himself, itself, into human form to give us a handle, and then gives us a form to replace the errant forms that we have, to replace mother's voice in our head, or to replace, dad's voice in our head, with that of the avatar, that of a purer form, a purer manifestation of God, so that we don't have to fight with ourselves quite as much. And so that's the role of God when bringing someone to himself through the path of devotion, is he manifests as the purest form possible in this world, and that gives us something to safely attach to, something an attachment that won't bring about a deeper delusion. It will also be attachment that we will drop, as we saw that when Ramakrishna, in that deep meditation with Totapuri, had to cut the Divine Mother in half, if you remember that. That every time he meditated, the Holy Mother would the Divine Mother would immediately stand in front of him in his mind. And that to push through that, to get to the Advaita, to get to the one without a second, he literally said he pulled out the sword of discernment and sliced the image in half and went into an ecstatic samadhi for 6 months. Laid there, had to be rolled around on the floor by, was it Hriday or Hazra? Had to take care of him for 6 months and, push rice and milk into his mouth to keep him alive, because he had a completely abandoned body and mind for 6 months from that meditation. He went into that samadhi, that state of knowing, of being released from form. So quite a fascinating thing there. So questioner now says, well, it's interesting that you say that God is a human or a person form. If I believe myself to be a person form, he asks, can I change facts by changing attitude? Right? Can I change reality just by changing my attitude? And Maharaj, always coming in with the interesting angle that you don't expect, always says the attitude is the fact. All right. Now we've got at least 2 weeks of meditation to do to try and figure out what is that. The attitude is the fact. Take anger. I may be furious, pacing the room up and down. At that same time, I know what I am, a center of wisdom and love, an atom of pure existence. All subsides and the mind merges into silence, right? So I may be furious. So that could be the state of mind, that you're furious, you're stomping up and down the room. And at the same time, I know what I am, right? So there's a counterweight. There's an option for you. You can identify with the mind, which is angry, or you can identify with the center of wisdom and love within yourself, the heart, right? And if you do that, if you identify with that center within you, everything else will subside and the mind will merge into silence. As soon as you become uninterested in the flow of the mind, it begins to silence. It's your interest and your constant addition of me and mine to the mind that causes it to be infected. Really, mind by its nature is calm. It operates when it's needed, but most of the time it's just calm. It's just peaceful. It's not causing any delusion. But any time that we stir it with the idea of a particular, a me and a mine, the mind gets disturbed because that's an unnatural idea. That's an idea that's foreign to the nature of ourself. And so when we introduce this idea of a particular interest, a particular love, a particular wanting, the mind gets disturbed because now it's dealing with something unnatural to itself. And so it gets all mixed up in there. And so our history of ourself, assuming that we're described by the mind, by the disturbed mind, we get a wrong idea of who we are based on our experiences and our memories as we remember them today, anyway. And but that it's inaccurate and it's problematic, and that's why our moods and our constant shifting in states of mind, our ups and our downs, our sideways, all of these different things. And so he just gave us the solution to that. It's like at that point, when you see anger in the mind, or you see lust in the mind, or you see anything in the mind, the only reason you get troubled by it is because you blame yourself for it. You identify with it. I'm the one thinking terrible thoughts. And so by thinking that you are the one thinking and that these thoughts belong to you, you harness yourself to them. And you have to go where they go. So if they go into depression, or if they go into lust, or they go into anger, you have to follow them only because you've strapped yourself to them, right? That's why I love Hafiz's poem about being strapped, having to cross the desert strapped to the wrong end of a farting camel. That's what it is to identify yourself with mind. You have consciously decided to strap yourself to the wrong end of a farting camel in order to cross the desert of this world. So if you are weird enough to do something like that, well, you're weird enough to suffer. That's the way it is. And so he's giving us an alternative here. Don't do it. Know that you and the camel are two different things, and you don't have to strap yourself to it. Know that your thoughts are just the results of previous thoughts, which are the results of previous action and previous experiences, but they're not personal. They simply happened and were. And this engine is just rolling round and round and round and round. And at any time, you can decide to become the observer of it rather than the actor in it, rather than the one doing it, because you will find that you're not the one that's doing it. You will find that this ball has been rolling down the hill of its own accord, and you've decided to strap yourself to it, but it was optional. You didn't have to. And but now that you have, you're so deeply identified with it that extricating yourself from this unfortunate decision is rather difficult, because it will keep dragging you back, because you are in the habit of obeying your thoughts, of identifying yourself with thoughts. And those habits are the hard part of spiritual life. Attaining the truth is easy, but to attain the truth, you have to break the habits. That's the difficult part. And all of us have terrible habits when it comes to seeing things as they are. We're just not able to do it very well. All right. And so he says, if you identify with this place as, and put your I am, like I am, in the center of wisdom and love, that you, and think to yourself, I'm an atom of pure existence, all of it will subside and the mind will ultimately merge into silence. And the questioner says, well, still you are angry sometimes. And Maharaj, with whom am I to be angry? And for what? Anger came and dissolved on my remembering myself. It is all a play of gunas, the qualities, the tamas, rajas, and sattva. When I identify myself with them, when I strap myself to them, when my mind feels one of them and I say, oh, that's me, I feel this way, or my body is suffering from one of them and I hug my body and hold on to it and say, oh, that's what I am. Then we feel the qualities, the results of that identity, of that contact of identity. And he's saying, but remember, you are not a particular, you're a principle, right? You're the principle of love. You're the principle of wisdom. You're the principle, the essence of being. You are not the product of them, right? So don't identify with the product of them. Identify with the principle. The principle is unchanging. So any time that you are faced with the newness of the moment, you just apply the same principle, the principle of love, wisdom, and being. And that will manifest properly and purely. But what we do when we meet the moment, we take a sense of particular and we apply that to the moment instead of our principle, which is love, wisdom, and being. Instead of applying the principle to the moment, we apply our identity to the moment. And things go wonky. And we're left stunned with how confusing life is and how mean God has been to us. All right, so with whom am I to be angry and for what? Anger came and dissolved, right? That anger was just another thought, a thought that's left unidentified with. If you don't reach out and touch it with me in mind, that thought just comes up and goes away. Same thing with anger. If that thought comes up and you just remain uninterested and you don't tie yourself to it, it just also goes away immediately. Lust, the image comes up. If you don't attach an eye to it, if you don't get interested in it, that thought also just goes away. It's the magic of how to control yourself. The magic ingredient to learning how to control yourself is to know who you are. You don't have to learn to control the body. You just have to learn that it's not you and that it just runs on its own motor. Now, this all seems, I guess, probably pretty far out there. It's not, though. It just takes some time to become sensitive enough inside to see it. You see, this is why we have to do our practice. This is why we have to go inside. And this is why we really have to tailor a life that's conducive to knowing ourselves, because the rest of the world is going to, they're not only are they creating a body out of God, they're creating a body out of you, and treating you according to their sense of I and to their own mishmash of memories and attachments, right? This is why we have such a hard time getting along with each other. If we applied our principle, which is what we are, instead of our mind, our collection of samskaras, if we would apply the principle to the circumstance, to the moment, we would all be fine. We would be able to say exactly what he's saying here. Somebody makes you angry, and it would arise and it would go. You might say a word, you might yell at them or something, but it would go. It's like Ramakrishna said, the anger of a holy man is like drawing a line on the water. It's momentary. The anger can be there, no problem, but the grudge will never be there. The anger comes and goes. It's not held on to. And so, with whom am I to be angry and for what? Anger came and dissolved, right? When I remembered myself. When I remembered I'm the principle. I'm not a particular. I'm a principle. that can be universally applied. That's who I am. When I identify myself with these gunas or with these changing qualities, with the waves of the mind, when I identify myself with them, I am their slave. I'm bound to feel what they make me feel. I'm bound to believe what they say is true. I'm bound to identify myself with them and not separate myself from the qualities of the changing world, to believe myself to be of the changing world, right? When I stand apart, when you know that you are principle and not particular, when you separate from mind and body, then you know who you are, and you are the master. They will fall in line in time. Again, all of this is a matter of your earnestness and sincerity inside, in the way that you do your practice. And our whole practice is to just watch, see the mind, see the body, feel them in your inner world, and see that you are separate, and just keep returning to that place until you know that separateness, and you know what aspect of your inner world is coming from the body, and what aspect of your inner world is coming from the mind, and what aspect of your inner world is the self. Now, the self is the one that really can't be defined, because it's not geospatial, it's not material, and you can't observe it because it is the one observing. And so it can only be found by negating the other two, negating body, negating mind. And through that negation, the mind silences, and in that silence, you know what you are, because you're no longer being distracted by everything else telling you what you are. You can now hear your own self as the principle, right? Which is where the sages came up with Satchitananda, love, wisdom, and being. So the questioner says, well, can you influence the world by your attitude? By separating yourself from the world, you lose all hope of helping it. Maharaj, how can it be? All is myself. Can't I help myself? I do not identify myself with anybody in particular, for I am all, both the particular and the universal. Right? So you are your world. We've talked about this. You are your world. When you go to sleep, it disappears. But you are that world. And it's your imagination of your relationships, your imagination of your story, your definition of yourself, your resultant self in the midst of that story that has created your world. And all of us live in our own world, right? You sit there with thoughts about your mother and your father that don't affect me. Your relationship with your wife and your son don't affect me. You've got your own world that you've lived in, your own bondage, your own things that you've decided to be responsible to, the own habits you've decided to call yourself, and I have mine. And then we run around bumping into each other based on those ideas, based on those attachments. But our understanding of ourself as a principle is not particular. We don't act from our story. We act from the divine principle that we are: love, wisdom, and being. Anything done, any life lived following those three principles is fulfilling, is positive, is a life that leads towards oneness. Can you then help me, the particular person? So our questioner is saying, well, I'm particular. I know it. I think this is me. Can you do something about that? And Maharaj says, but I do help you always from within. Myself and yourself are one. I know it, but you don't. That is all the difference, and it cannot last. Right? It cannot last. I am you. I'm just another manifestation, another spin-off of that principle. But that principle, which is creating both of us, is singular. And it is what you are, and it is what I am. And because it is the truth, we cannot maintain our delusion forever. That's why Thakur says everybody ultimately comes to their realization. Some are going to do it in time for breakfast. Some are going to do it in time for lunch. And then, gosh, at this point in the world, looks like you and I are coming in for dinner or dessert. Either way, we're coming in with the divine. So this is the inevitability of your salvation, the inevitability of your freedom, your moksha, your liberation. And so you can hold on to that. As much as you might suffer, you can always know that it won't last forever. It might last a long time, but we won't get into the details. A long time, just in the words of Nachiketas, a long life is short indeed on the last day. So even if it is a long time, when moksha comes, it will have been worth it. Will never outweigh the value of it. All right, so Maharaj has told us here that this ignorance cannot last, that he is helping us always in the same way Ramakrishna helps us, in the same way Buddha, Jesus, Rama, Krishna, all of God's direct manifestations are always present. Just the thought of them is helpful because it's a thought of purity, a thought, transcendent thought. So it helps us. It constantly reminds us. And so we'll eventually get there. So now Maharaj, so the questioner says, and how do you help the entire world? How is it that you say that you're helping me just because we have the same principle within, because we are the same principle? Maharaj, Gandhi is dead, yet his mind pervades the earth. The thought of a Jnani pervades humanity and works ceaselessly for good. Being anonymous, coming from within, it is the more powerful and compelling. That is how the world improves, the inner aiding and blessing the outer. When a Jnani dies, he is no more, in the same sense in which a river is no more when it merges in the ocean. The name, the shape are no more, but the water remains and becomes one with the ocean. When a Jnani joins the universal mind, when he gives up his individuality, when he knows, when he's free from his boundaries and his limitations and restrictions, when he joins the universal mind, all his goodness and wisdom become the heritage of humanity and uplift every human being, right? Because he has become part of the mix that becomes each one of us. And so that's why Vivekananda says that a sage sitting on a mountaintop and realizing God does more good than 1,000 hospital volunteers. That this effect that a person has on the world when one realizes or knows oneself is greater than 1,000 people doing volunteer work. Now, that doesn't diminish the volunteer work. It just shows how powerful it is for someone who sits and does the work for realization, which we'll just pause enough to laugh at that comment. But anyway, it benefits everyone. So your spiritual life is a benefit to the entire world because you are adding truth to that infinite self, which is the one in all of us. And so all of us are affected. It might be affected, just in a very subtle way, like when Jupiter lops past the Earth, all of us feel a little bit of pull, but we certainly don't recognize it. But that doesn't diminish the fact that it happens. And so in this world, when a Jesus, comes, or when a Buddha comes, or when someone realizes God, there's a pull, there's a help, there's a slant toward freedom. And we read their books, we hear about their lives, we think about the things that they say. And with each one of those, the doors of our cage rattles just a little bit more. Right? And they, in their dissolution, in their joining the one without a second, they become all of our heritage. They become an echo within us that reminds us of a truth. a truth that we know is true because we can feel it. We can feel the resonance. We may not be able to grasp it. The mind may not be able to wrap itself around it, but we sense a resonance. We know. Uh-huh. I remember when I was in seminary, gosh, Mother puts these weird memories in here, but a long time ago, 1983, I'm sitting in the Lake Forest Mall. Am I? No, I'm in Abilene. So I'm sitting in the mall in Abilene. I don't think it's the Lake Forest, but anyway, I'm sitting in the mall on a chair, and I'm a first year Bible student at this point. I'm a rabid fundamentalist. I'm ready to send everybody to hell. And so I'm sitting there on a bench, and I hear this couple walk by, and this couple is talking about the universal avatar, believe it or not. And I think actually the crazy part of this story is I think I met the couple in Sacramento because they used to live in Lubbock, and they would occasionally come down to Abilene, they told me. And in my mind's eye, I can't remember who they were, but this couple certainly didn't violate any sensitivity. I was thinking, oh my God, I think you two are the ones that did this to me, because they walked by talking about the universal avatar and how about they were talking about how Jesus had come many times, but in different forms. And I heard just that little statement as they walked by. And I, being a Bible major, I was fascinated by that statement. And immediately my mind, because I was a good fundamentalist, immediately my mind started trying to pull up scriptures that would refute that idea and prove it to be wrong. And I couldn't think of any. I couldn't find any scriptures that would have refuted that notion. And take that forward 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. Oh my God, yeah, probably 35 years. And I'm sitting in this symposium at Cambridge University with a room full of people way more educated than myself. I literally felt like somebody who snuck in. But I'm sitting there and I'm defending my little paper on Vedic Christianity, and I make that same statement. That he who was Jesus is he who was Buddha, is he who was Rama, he who was Krishna. That there is no difference, and that Jesus even alludes to it by saying he's coming back again, because all the avatars keep saying they're going to come back again, and she always does come back again. And so that got two theologians that were at this same conference very, very interested, and we started having a conversation in the room, because that's why we were there. They also could not refute it from the Catholic perspective, with the exception of the idea that in 1967, at some pretty current, 1967, that's 2,000 years late, but 2,000 years later, they did at this council in 1967 make the statement that the power of salvation lies within the church, not within the body of Jesus. And so they found a way around. They didn't actually find a scripture that refuted the idea that there's one avatar that keeps manifesting. But they came up with the idea that it didn't matter because we've moved the power of salvation into the institution instead of the person. So anyway, I said, well, 1967, that's late enough for me to not consider that part of Jesus's teaching. But anyway, that was that. So the questioner now says, well, we're attached to our personality. Oof, well, attachment is our personality, actually. That's attachment is your personality. So we are attached to our personality, our individuality, our being unlike others. We value very much. You seem to denounce both as useless. You're unmanifested. Of what use is it to us? Maharaj. I like Vivekananda. I don't know what he's going to say, but Vivekananda got this same argument one time. And Vivekananda made a great retort. He says, you can't be more unique than one without a second. You can't be more unique than that. So Maharaj says, unmanifested, manifested, individuality, personality, nirguna, saguna, vyakta, vyakti. All these are mere words, mere points of view, mere mental attitudes. There is no reality in them. The real is experienced in silence. You cling to personality, but you are conscious of being a person only when you are in trouble. When you are not in trouble, you do not think of yourself. Oh gosh, that's another 2-week assignment to try and think about that. Is that true? You only think about yourself when you're in trouble. Yeah, probably true. Of course, I think about myself when I'm being praised also. Of course, that could be me being in trouble. But, wow, there's a light. Yeah, so we think about ourselves. When we think about ourselves, it's because we're in trouble or somehow our boundaries are being touched, right? Anytime our boundaries get touched, we become aware of ourselves. Someone annoys you, they do something, and you feel your boundary, your limitation of love. Someone makes you angry, someone cuts you off, someone mistreats you. Then we become aware of ourselves. We become aware of our boundary, the definitions, the limitations and restrictions that compose our personality. So there's no reality to it, though. It's just your mind. And God, that's such an oasis. It's really a challenge lately for me. I don't know why I'm sharing this, just because it's here. But it's been a challenge because, at this point in my life, I can't tell what came because I've been in a monastery for 25 years and what was easy. What I mean? It's like when I was a computer science person and I would sit and try and help one of the people I was hired to support on their computer. And I was a computer science major. I'd been studying computers for 9 years at that point. And so I'd be there. I just couldn't understand how they couldn't figure that out. It was so obvious. It was like, what do you mean? Well, why'd you do that? Why would you do that? This is the paradigm, right? It's easy, just click, click, click. And they would be like, why do you do it for me every time? Let me do it. And I'm like, oh my God, I'd be here for 3 hours trying to get you to do it. Well, this, I find some now I'm in the same situation. It's like things that have changed in the mind because of 25 years of monastery. I don't have any way of knowing why they changed, but just this seeing. But the reason I'm saying all of that is that I want to talk about this idea of withdrawing from the mind, of just understanding the importance of this truth, that thoughts are just thoughts. And we've become so attached to them, we don't even recognize them as thoughts. They just immediately identify us. When the mind says something, there is not even a lag time before we're reacting, identifying. We don't even see them as thoughts. They're so closely aligned with ourselves. And I spent so many years, decades of my life pushing against those thoughts, trying to find virtue, trying to express, unselfishness, trying to express love in my practices, always doing it from within the mind as a member of the mind, and just couldn't get anywhere but horribly frustrated with the fact that nothing seemed to change, that I couldn't get past things. And just in the last 2-3 years, when this notion of not being mind has really started to come to a maturity, and even as recently as this week, where I've had a breakthrough in dealing with the noisy mind who just kept bringing up one particular thing again and again and again and again, like it always has for years and years and years. And for the first time, about 3 days ago, for the first time, I successfully defeated it by refusing to identify with it, to constantly not looking at the content of what it was constantly bringing up, not looking at the subject matter, which is how we get caught in it, but identifying it merely as a thought and negating my association with a thought. That's just a thought. I'm not the mind. And returning to the silence, and just sitting there and fighting it as a thought and not as a subject. wow, was I stunned when that worked? I was like, whoa, whoa. Now it took me about 40 minutes of that. That thought was there for, it was still coming. But I wasn't getting caught up in the thinking, because usually when you deal with the subject matter is what you're attached to. That's what you think is you. And when you show an interest in it, it's the nature of the mind to bring up more of that memory, more of that subject, more of that visual, whatever it is, and present it to you. And so when you're fighting it within as a subject within the mind with it, you're going to lose, because the whole mind is going to surround that side, and you're going to be this little island inside, fighting with your toothpick, like, get away, get away. And you're not going to win. It isn't going to do it. But if you understand that it's just thought, don't worry about what the thought is. Just label it. It's a thought. I am not the mind. And then go back to your freedom. Go back to the peace you were experiencing before that mind started to bother you, before that attachment started to tug at you and try and pull you out of your center, pull you out of your peace. And I tell you, it really works. But what I don't know how to tell you is how to do it other than to just do it. And I think that just doing it only happens when you've been considering it for quite some time, perhaps. I don't know. But the end of it, to try and make sense of this ball of knotted yarn that I'm weaving here, the end of it is don't give up. Don't give up, because there's no indication that it's going to happen that evening. It just happens. And you're set free from something that has bothered you your entire life. So just don't give up. Let's not worry about whether it's because you done it for 25 years in a monastery or not. The fact is that if you keep going forward, you're going to see these things. You're going to see them firsthand. You're going to know them firsthand. And that if you're not seeing it right at this moment, that's not an indication of years to come. That could be an indication of the very next moment is going to manifest the insight, manifest the truth to you, and you'll be free. And so know that. Just be and assume you're at peace and stay in that peace. And when the mind, any kind of thought, comes to try and push you out of that place, stiff arm it. That's just a thought. And I'm not that. And return to principle. Return to principle, a universal principle that will manifest as the perceived other touches it. I'll have to think about that one, actually. Anyway.
So, Maharaj, it's almost like a mini samadhi, right? Because the thoughts have all calmed down, and one sees the source, or not sees, but or is the source, right? So I'm sorry, my mom is here.
That's all right.
Yes. So when the thought, when one drops the thought, then it's a natural fallback into the oneness. Right? Is that what one is? Is that the right pointer? No.
It's a pointer. I'm hoping that's not what happened, because at the level of what I'm thinking samadhi is, this would be very disappointing.
No, but they say they're like mini samadhis. It's not like the ultimate samadhi,
right.
But
yeah,
it's for a second.
Yeah, it's the layman's samadhi, perhaps. That because you do get some freedom. You do get freedom from your thought. You do get freedom from the effect of that thought. Your slavery to that thought is broken, But what that leaves you with is whatever place you're sitting in as the observer. And uh, I find this is where bhakti really informs my jnana, because instead of just sitting in silence, I sit in bliss. I sit in love, the assumed love of the presence of the beloved, of the divine. And so, yes, in that sense, but it's only as strong as your assumption of your nature. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
so, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's definitely a pointer. But that's, I think it's a big trick. It's like, don't step into your mind and deal with all of the things in mind, as we're gonna need that muted. I can't hear myself. Who's
Oh.
is it you? Okay. Sorry. That uh, don't step into your mind and be defined by the mind and let the mind define the struggle. That's what makes it difficult. When we step into mind with our identity and then try and fight the mind from within, it's not a winnable situation. You have to, at some point, have a hint of an experience of no mind. You have to know what that silence feels like and where it comes from inside. And that, that can take some practice. That can take some very careful inner attention. But that's why Ramakrishna spends so much time. Not just Ramakrishna, but Jesus, Buddha, Rama. All of them tell us to go within. Learn about this interior world that you don't pay any attention to because you're always looking out and enjoying all of the colorful change going on outside. It's like, turn that attention within and start to learn the architecture of your inner world, right? And through the learning of that architecture, through the observance of how it works together, become intuitively aware of yourself as the observer. And what that does is it opens the heart, it opens this shrine where your principle is printed, the principle of Satchitananda, the principle of love, wisdom, and being. Learn to come into that place. And when the mind is noisy, see it as other and see the principle as self, and apply the principle to everything. Let the principle drive your reactions and not your thoughts, not your mind stuff. And if you could, to the extent that you can manage to do that, to that extent, you'll be like Buddha. You'll be like Jesus, because they were the purest manifestations of that divine principle, which is what we are. So in that scenario, God is a principle. God is the principle of love, existence, and wisdom, right? And so everything in the universe is an expression of that principle. And as you can see, that principle can be expressed in billions of different ways. And if you stay identified with the principle, you'll always see the principle's manifestation. If you identify with the mishmash of thoughts in your mind, you will very rarely see the principle, because you won't understand its nature. You won't know it because you haven't seen yourself as it. And so whatever you see yourself as we've seen today, whatever you see yourself as, you will see the world as, you will see God as. And so, yes. So you did not tell me the uses of the unmanifested. You did not tell me the uses of the unmanifested. We need an emoji after that one, of that little guy with tears laughing really hard, like the uses of the unmanifested. Okay, let's see what he says. This is I love that. You didn't tell us what the uses of the unmanifested were. Maharaj, surely you must sleep in order to wake up. You must die in order to live. You must melt down to shape anew. You must destroy to build, annihilate before creation. The Supreme is the universal solvent. It corrodes every container. It burns through every obstacle. Without the absolute denial of everything, the tyranny of things would be absolute. The Supreme is the great harmonizer. the guarantee of the ultimate and perfect balance of life in freedom. It dissolves you and thus reasserts your true being. So the unmanifested is the principle unmanifested. It's just the principle. It's the guitar before it's strummed, right? And the strummer of the guitar would be Brahman, and the result of strumming it would be Shakti. That vibration. The strings will move until they reattain their balance, their perfection, right? When a set of blocks, when you build a tower, they fall, but eventually stop when all of the blocks meet their stable condition, right? And it's the mind. The mind will think until me and mine is resolved, right? Until the idea of me and mine is discarded, because only then can the mind, which is a singularity, attain its harmony again, attain its perfect balance. So you see, the thoughts of me and mine are what keep your tower from stabilizing. And so you have to pull back from mind. And that's a beautiful, beautiful lesson with an almost boundless help and implication for our practice. You are not the mind is one of the most important teachings for realization, because your mind holds your bondage. Your mind holds your ignorance. And your mind, through your identity with it, locks your cage, right? And so we have to get out of that cage, because acting from inside the cage, no matter what you do, you're in bondage. You're in a cage. So as long as you are identifying with your past, a description of your memories being you're in the cage. And you can only fight in the cage, but you can't be free. You have to step outside the cage, right? You have to step outside the cage. And initially, that's very difficult. It's like that story of the man who had been in the dungeons of the king for his whole life. He was an old man, and he was arrested as a very young man and lived his whole life in the dungeon. And then the king dies, and now there's a new king, and he has all the dungeon doors open. It sets everybody free. And this old man steps out of the dungeon and into the daylight for the first time in 50 years or 60 years. And the light, oh my God, that light, what a horrible thing. Oh, the wind, oh, the temperature. Anyway, he turns around, goes back into his dungeon and shuts the door. He's like, no. I don't know what that was. I'm not interested. And see, this is why spiritual life is so difficult, because you and I have spent all of our life in our little cage, and we've come to enjoy it very much. It's familiar. We know the rules. We know the experiences. We know the good and we know the bad. And this is fine with me. Thank you very much. And when anything comes in to challenge that, we immediately shut the door, lock it up. Oh, no. And so that's the difficulty of spiritual life, because as you go through spiritual life, you have to disidentify. You have to let go of all of these little refuges of being a person that you've grabbed onto to distract yourself from the inner pain that you're suffering from being, because being in ignorance, right? And so we're very hesitant to let go of these things. And some of these things, in the moment, we can't let go of them because we're dealing with a series of triggers that we're not even aware of, that keep us clutching. That brings me back to my story of my broken leg. I was holding my own foot on my own leg. And the very gracious ambulance guy comes over and he says, please let go of your foot, because we're going to splint it into place. And I said, okay. And then he told me again. And I said, okay. And he told me a third time. And I had to admit, I'm not in charge. I can't let go of my leg. I can't let go. I'm sitting here I'm looking at my fingers, clutching my leg. And I'm saying to myself, let go. There's no obedience there, right? And that is our predicament. We have been under delusion for so long. So many gears have been put into place that we don't even remember putting there. And now we have to let go of them. right? And so this is why spiritual life is a process. It's not that you have to become something, it's that you have to unbecome something. You have to stop being a particular. Like Swami Prabhupada used to say, we have to dehypnotize ourselves. We have been hypnotized by the world and what others have taught us about ourselves for as long as we've been alive. And now here comes a Ramakrishna, or here comes a Jesus, or here comes a Buddha, and says, no, 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 no. You are not a fireman. You are not a husband or a wife. You are not an animal. You are not a sexual being. You are not this, that, or the other. You are the ever free, ever pure self, universal in your nature, no particular. And you look at them and you're like, whatever. Right? And then you sit and you start practicing. And for the first, I would say, for my first 6 years in the monastery, it was miserable. The only thing good about it was being faced with the beautiful idea. But my challenges, trying to keep myself from sneaking out to get a quick fried chicken dinner at Denny's, that went on for 6 years, where I dreamed of nothing but fried chicken in a vegetarian monastery. It was horrifying.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, it's that's what we're up against. So I had finally got to a point where I could decide that I wasn't necessarily defined by eating chicken, and so that would be all right. But you go on, it's funny because we live in torment in the mind. And it's just like that story of the bird that has the fish in its mouth. And so all of the other crows or ravens or kites or whatever they are trying to get that fish out of its mouth, and it's being badgered to death. And then at some point it accidentally drops the fish and all the other birds go after it. It's free. It's no longer being badgered by all those other thoughts. That is the whole process in one story right there. The thinking, the identity with thought is that fish in our mouth. And it's causing all the other thoughts to attack and to come in and to suggest and to pull and to punch. And we're like, what's going on? My life is such a mess. Oh my God, I'm so confused. I've got so much stress. I have so much to do. I'm dying. And, and then for a moment you step outside of the mind and you're like, wait a minute, that's just one room in my interior space. It's not the only room. There's another room, which I never knew of because it was so quiet and peaceful and never caught my attention. And you step from momentarily into that room and you're like, whoa, I can see forever in here, right? And then you hear something interesting going on in the other room. You can't help it. You're listening to it through the wall now. But you're still listening to it, right? And it's still affecting you. You're like, oh, wow, what was that? Oh my gosh, she did what? Oh my Lord. And you're all involved in it again. And so then you have to be like, oh my God, wait, that's that other room. That's the other room. No, not important. And pull back into Shiva, pull back into the absolute notion, pull back into the symbol alone, the principle alone, Satchitananda, and sit in that place, and whatever touches that symbol, which is the moment, the manifestation that's constantly coming off of the vibration of that symbol, that principle of love, wisdom, and being is like the guitar string. And anytime any circumstance or anything strums that string, love and wisdom is manifested. And it does it naturally. It doesn't require this thought of causation, time and space. It doesn't require, subject object relationship. It's spontaneous. The moment strikes the principle, and love, wisdom is manifested in being. And just remember, this principle is you, not anything that's being that's reverberating off of it. That's all the thoughts. That's all the world. That's all of material. You are the principle itself. It takes no action on your part. It simply takes being what you are. And in that is your freedom. In that is your knowledge of your infinite, universal, never dying, never being born, ever free self. It's life on the pinhead. as it were. All right. It's 10:06. I've gone over again.